All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. It's great to have you. So I'll just say a few things before getting stuck into things. This seminar is going to cover essentially what to do when you don't know anything about the motion. So it'll cover so it might be just a slight tweak on, I think, what was in the sort of schedule, which was, I think, a reference to spec debates. So it will include a bit of that, but it'll be a little bit broader as well, just about like essentially when you're just stumped for arguments is kind of the gist. And these are just, I guess, some of my strategies about how I would go about things if I'm just really not having an inspo moment with trying to think of arguments or something just does not come, to my mind straight away. I would say that these strategies are sort of at a beginner to intermediate level. I think if you're a debater that's been around for a few years, these strategies are probably not going to be anything that novel or new to you. But nonetheless, might be a good refresher. Um, so that's kind of the main thing I'd say from the outset. I really would, like participation in this seminar, and there'll be components where I will sort of chime in and ask for your participation. So it'll be very explicit. I would be comfortable with people participating in two ways. One is just in the Zoom chat, although that is sometimes difficult to see when you're presenting. So people, I would love, if you just put your like the notification to put your hand up and then I'll call upon you. That would be really, really helpful. So that's really it, I think, in terms of context. And also, sorry if I look a little bit sleepy, the time zone is not quite it for me here. And I had to have a little nappy nap before, but we're going to be fine. So if there's nothing from the outset, I'll basically just get stuck into it and go straight. There's no kind of context or framing. I'm just going to go through a bunch of basically strategies that kind of work for me. And then happy to leave plenty of time at the end for further questions, both on this and just like anything else that I may or may not be able to help you with. We'll give it my best. Okay, so let's jump into it. So the first kind of thing that I think is really helpful if you're struggling to think of arguments or you're really stuck on emotion is, and again, this is not a super advanced tip by any stretch of the imagination, but is just to kind of think of stakeholders. Let's start with an example, a law motion. So you're most likely going to rattle off the same list of stakeholders for most of these debates. You might think about victims, you might think of perpetrators, police, prosecutors, judges, juries, legal NGOs, media, governments, racial minorities. The list probably goes on. So I'll give you an example to start off, and then we'll kind of maybe workshop the second example together. So let's say you're doing the debate. This House supports the use of not proven verdicts in criminal trials. I think doing a stakeholder list can be very helpful in debates like this. So, for example, let's, say or you could be government, you could be OG, you could be CG, and you're either struggling to think of something, or maybe you're closing and your top half has kind of already talked about, the very, kind of obvious arguments, maybe that, this is just good when you get more evidence later, and then you can kind of prosecute at a later stage. You don't need to, worry as much. Okay, what could you cover later? Well, I think, if you've gone through a list of stakeholders, you might think, okay, how do I talk about police and prosecutors in this scenario? And, this worked for me in an example that I did when I was in this debate in CG, where I could talk about how because there's not as much pressure on you to get a successful verdict the first time, it often means that police and prosecutors exercise less heavy-handed tactics when it comes to prosecuting individuals because there's not as much pressure on their career, on their, verdict record. If they lose, it's not like the end of the world. It's just like a not proven verdict that can come back to later. So it means that police and prosecutors act in a way that's more ethical. So that's just an example where if you think about the stakeholders that are going to be involved in your action, it might prompt some thinking about how then that kind of lends itself to the debate. So that's just a very basic thing to start with. Now, with sports motions, I'm wondering if some people could help me out here in just rattling off who they think are in any kind of general sports debate, who they think are probably going to be some of the main stakeholders. Happy for, I can see the chat actually. I'm not sure if I can. Yeah, so happy for people to jump in. Jeremiah, if you've got some thoughts, that would be great.
I would say the stakeholders are the players, the viewers, any kind of entity that's like regulating the leagues, the
Mhm.
teams. Yeah, those are the main ones that come to mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any others that jump out to people? Liv, yeah,
Maybe like young people who are inspired by the players or who might grow up in the communities around them.
yep, yep, great. Anyone else have any ideas? And this can be applicable to the motion that's down there in the slide, but it could also be just any others in a sports debate. Um, Otherwise, I think those are probably some of the main ones. Sorry if this was actually said, but what else? I guess there could be. Oh, actually, Clara, yeah,
I was gonna say like the paid for subscription services, so like maybe Sky Sports.
yep, yep. Yeah, and that was going to make me think about, I guess, like all the profit like actors that kind of surround the sports industry, sponsors, yeah, the television industry, absolutely. Maybe if there's like international bodies and stuff that like also link to these clubs, if they kind of funnel up into some sort of league. So yeah, sports has like a crazy amount of stakeholders, which often I think get overlooked. And I think again, this is kind of a neat way of generating material, especially sometimes extension material where you're just like, again, the obvious clashes have kind of been taken and you're kind of struggling. So let's take the example that we've got, right on the screen. This house believes that sports clubs should be majority owned by the local communities they represent. Now, let's say you're again, maybe let's say you're CG, and the very like obvious argument of, um, fans put a lot of investment into their clubs. It's their life. It means a lot to them. They should therefore, be able to, um, you know, have a stake in the clubs that kind of mean so much to them. Um, Given the kind of stakeholders we've kind of rattled off so far, does anyone have any ideas for any arguments that might come after this, that could be utilized? Happy to give people a second to ponder. But yeah, where could maybe the debate head in that direction? So you're just like, what do I do now? They've taken the obvious, the obvious gov line. Where do I go from here? Yeah, Clara.
Is this for OG, sorry, or if you were, can we say for OO as well?
If you were, well, in the first instance, I guess if you were maybe CG and Gov's take OG's like taking the kind of more intuitive Gov argument of, good fans get a controlling stake because, they invest so much into their clubs, blah, 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 blah. Um, any thoughts on where the kind of the direction that CG might head would be? Um,
Maybe like I was
mhm.
thinking from kind of like a viewership perspective of if it's majority owned by the local communities and these people are likely the people consuming the sport in the first place. Um, but then also I feel like that could be taken by OG quite easily.
Yeah, 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 fair. So I think there are like a few things that can be talked about in terms of, better policy that filters up and those sorts of things. If you're thinking of relationship to the sort of major leagues and those sorts of things. On op, there's probably, I think, a few things in particular that are maybe prompted by that kind of stakeholder analysis. Does anyone have any thoughts? I have some that come to mind, but um, does anyone can anyone think of kind of major op lines, I guess, as a result of the stakeholders we've talked about? Jeremiah? Yep.
Um, I think uh line that would come up for op on like let's say a CEO if op takes the obvious one is maybe it's worse for the players in terms of like the major clubs as well. If they're owned by certain companies, they're probably gonna have better expertise in terms of like management, in terms of like brand deals and just making money. And a lot of them, like one of the primary interests is obviously like making a lot of money. And if they're losing a lot of it as a direct product of it, would be a really big harm to them. Not just on like the massive scale of like Premier League football, but also on like the smaller scale of like people just trying to make a living out of the semi-professional leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's just a lot there in terms of the various management-based stakeholders of a club. And you can definitely talk about the players in this scenario. It can even be, sponsors and their kind of perception of these clubs. And you don't even necessarily have to prove that these clubs would be run badly, but that might be a perception of that. And therefore that leads to like less sponsor incentives and those sorts of things. So anyway, we don't have to workshop this one in a lot more detail, but essentially, yeah, I just think it might kind of help teams who are struggling a little bit when they kind of run through the list of stakeholders. Again, not a super novel proposition, but I think is something that can be helpful, particularly in debates that may not be, your best strength subject matter wise. So we'll just go to the next one. So this is kind of a bit of a funny one where you're going to cover lots of debates in your life that are just not your strong suit. And I think this is not always a possible strategy, but where you can, I think, really think about ways in which you can debate the arguments in a realm that you're comfortable with. So I'll give you a bit of a funny example. One of the stories I like telling is I once had to debate the first motion. This house as Messi would not have left Barcelona. I think there might have been an info slide. I can't really remember. And it was like a debate where like myself and my partner were like surrounded by, absolute football fans who knew so much about this, and they were dropping crazy tons of spec about like which, club, Messi would play for would be more likely to win this and that. But and we were never going to beat those teams on those metrics. So I don't think this is a strategy that would have won every single time. But in this particular instance, we were like, okay, what does Messi care about? We're just assuming in this debate that he cares solely about, football success, not like a bunch of other things in his life, like his family and what relocation means to them, and like stability for young children who are, schooling age and stuff like that. That was like a bit of bullshit, not gonna lie. But we were like, you know what? We can talk about like, connection to family and what it means to someone and blah, 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 blah. And crazy we got through, but like it was I think a quarter or something. But we thought about how we fight this debate on our own metrics, and how can we play to our strengths. And, again, we're not going to beat a bunch of teams who are crazy about football on a football motion. It's just not going to happen. And again, I think that kind of example doesn't crop up every, too often. But anyway, it's a bit of a funny one. So using that kind of same, I guess, logic, let's kind of have a chat about the second motion now. So let's say you have in front of you, I guess it's maybe not the like densest econ debate in the world, but nonetheless, we've got this house believes that the IMF and the World Bank should not make debt relief for highly indebted poor countries conditional on trade liberalization. So again, the motion's basically saying that we shouldn't kind of tie this particular condition to countries seeking debt relief. Now, let's say, you're a debater that is just not super strong with economics motions. You don't feel you can properly explain, like, the ramifications of trade liberalization from a sort of economic perspective, what the impacts on the economy are, to, have this or not have this. I guess I'd want you to take a moment to think about where else you could kind of run lines. It could be gov lines, it could be op lines. What are some ideas people might have about how we could make this debate essentially not solely about kind of proving that trade liberalization is good or bad for one's economy? Because let's say we suck at economics. We don't know how to make those arguments. What are some other things that we could maybe say instead? Could be from Gov, could be from Op. I'll give you a sec to have a think. Yeah, Clara.
Maybe like from a kind of non-economic standpoint, but on like a sovereignty kind of standpoint, if you're to liberalize your country, and you're likely to have like more global partners, etc., etc. Like, could you potentially argue that that's a part of like your sort of national sovereignty and identity that you're potentially then compromising?
Yeah. So the more that you integrate yourself with other economies, the more you're kind of, yeah, like you're intertwining yourself with factors that are outside of your control, and therefore you have less autonomy in decision making. Yeah, definitely something that you could run. That's great. Jeremiah?
Yeah, Clara basically said the point that I was going to say, but I guess to extend on it very slightly, I
Yeah.
think the fact that relief from aid is conditional on doing this thing adds a sort of zero. I'm basically saying what Clara said in different words, but they're just actively pressuring you to make a certain choice, which is against principles of democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. There are always great sort of coercion arguments that are involved with any kind of debate around the IMF and World Bank. Even if you don't have a lot of spec knowledge, you can probably sort of intuit that these countries often didn't freely get into these conditions that they're in. And therefore, anything that kind of follows from that is a compounding kind of degradation of their kind of decision making, their autonomy, and those sorts of things. Likewise, sorry, I'll stop there unless anyone has any other thoughts.
I think
Yeah.
you've just given me one more idea.
Mhm.
I don't know if this would be the most fitting extension for the mission, but piggybacking off of what you said of like countries didn't get there voluntarily, I think one, framing that the reason that a lot of these countries are where they are is because of the countries that run the IMF. That is the UK and like the British Empire, France, Germany, etc., etc. So, because it's a believes that mission, I guess one, um, just saying that because these are the countries funding the IMF and they're the ones making the decisions, that they're principally obligated to give them debt relief because it's because of them that they're in that position, regardless of whether or not these countries take any sort of action, because it's their fault that they're there, it's their responsibility. But I think secondarily, because the reason these countries are rich is because of the resources that they took from the countries that are now in economically deplorable conditions.
Yeah, perfect. Couldn't have expressed it better myself. I think that's definitely a great argument to make. So, again, here you're kind of leveraging perhaps any history knowledge you have about these countries and the circumstances they've been in, their relationship with colonial states and those sorts of things. So you're not relying on having economics knowledge, you're just utilizing the knowledge you have, which is great. And perhaps, I guess, to flip some of those ideas, if you're perhaps coming to this motion from Op, you could talk about just the benefits of trade liberalization from basically the flip of integration and actually being good, that in fact countries that are more integrated economically with other states tend to have less human rights kind of violations, in the sense that it then makes it very easy for those integrated networks to then be used against you later for sanctions and stuff, which is why that countries, it's the whole classic, what is it, that McDonald's argument about every states that have not gone to war that have McDonald's and stuff. So there's like other things you can say about why interconnectedness between countries via a trade kind of mechanism is good for their kind of reduction of conflict, and perhaps even again how they treat their own population, those sorts of things. So yeah, sometimes people get into these debates and they kind of look at the words like IMF, World Bank, and they think, oh no, what I'm going to do, I'm not great in this area. But there's plenty of stuff that you can talk about from a democratic, human rights, historical principle perspective. So this is just a very different sort of example to the one above. I guess the key thing that I would say is important, regardless of what the motion is and regardless of what your strategy is you'll probably have to at some point do some weighing about why it is the consideration or the direction you've gone in is the most important. So again, going back to the Messi example, I had to explain why the considerations for his life and his family more generally were more important to him than, marginal win differences in a team. And, I could say that because I could, note the fact that he's already significantly successful. So that marginal difference isn't significant for him, whereas impacts to his family would be. Likewise, with this motion below, I think you would probably have to explain why, and again, let's say you're making these claims, particularly as a closing over an opening team that's run economics arguments, is why, the developmental human rights and other needs of a country are much more significant than whether their economic development is marginally X or Y. Yeah, Jeremiah.
I have a question on this specifically. I don't remember the exact motion, but there was a tournament where I kind of took a similar approach and ran an extension that maybe wasn't intuitively a part of the motion. And the feedback that I didn't do very well in that debate. The feedback that I got was the extension was good, but I didn't make it comparative because it was just very completely different from what all of the other teams were saying. So my question is, how do you give such a unique extension that may be not intuitively linked to the motion, but still not fall into the trap of not being comparative, not addressing the key clashes that have been raised?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And this is frankly a risk of any strategy like this. It always is a little bit, it can be hard for some judges to credit arguments that are very, very different to the arguments that the other three teams have run. So I'm just going to say that it's not a strategy that comes without risk. I don't think there are any perfect strategies for this other than number one, you just having to probably be very clear in framing from the outset that this is a significant, chunk of the debate that other teams have missed and why it's kind of important and relevant. And then I think, especially if you're closing, I think WIP especially needs to make a concerted effort to not let teams get away with dismissing the material out of hand or mocking it, that's not part of the debate. And if they don't respond to it because they trying to kind of flush it out of the debate, it's not that important. I think WIP especially needs to take that time to be they didn't respond to it, but again, that's that's bad for them because again, this material was so relevant because X, Y, and Z. I think it's a lot of rhetorical devices that are probably honestly the main thing, which is just about making the judge feel psychologically secure that this material is actually relevant and they're not crediting this rogue misidea kind of thing. So I think there's a lot in the rhetoric and about making the judge feel safe in being able to credit it. I know that's not, particularly groundbreaking, and I don't think, I think it kind of is just going to depend on the debate, unfortunately. But anyway, I'm keen to move on to the next strategy. So anyway, this is just, again, have confidence to make things about things that you feel things about. The next strategy is a bit of a, I was going to do two examples for this, but I think in the interest of time, I'll just kind of, just keep it to this one. So I think, this is sorry, can I see the chat? Yes, this was a fun debate. So look, I was trying to think of a few examples that would kind of suit this what I'm trying to get at here, but it was kind of hard to find exactly what I wanted to fit. Anyway, I digress. There are some debates where I feel like if you just take the time to read the info slide many, many times and draw out the inferences from it, you might stumble upon some motions. So let's give this one a go. So I'm just going to start with the first line, and every line we're going to kind of unpack whether there's something we can draw out from it. Okay, so let's start with the info slide. Agent McNulty is a detective who's worked for years on taking down the organized drug crime ring in the city of Baltimore. So I'm thinking, what does that tell us already? So he's worked for years, he's experienced, he's probably built up quite a bit of knowledge and evidence against this crime ring. Baltimore, what do we know from that? We know that that is a city that has somewhat a high crime rate. Anything else we know from there? Okay, organized drug crime means that his opponents are going to be tough as well. So that's something else we can kind of deduce from that. So it's like looking at every single word and being like, okay, what can we take from that? So let's go to the next line. He's a strong conviction that he can obtain evidence that can finally bring down one of the biggest drug kingpins, Marlo Stanfield, as well as his top lieutenants. So he's a strong conviction. We know that he's a detective, so because of that, it probably means that he has good reason to like, or the evidence is probably relatively solid, because this is not someone that has this feeling on a whim. This is someone who has the experience to back up this strong conviction. Bring down one of the drug kingpins. So that probably means it's evidence that would send this person away for a sizable portion of jail time, right? It's not like evidence of a crime that would get you like a 2-year prison sentence, right? That's what I would kind of deduce from that, as well as most of his top lieutenants. So he's probably got evidence that connects to some, yeah, basically the evidence connects multiple people. Okay, however, the city mayor has decided to cut the police budget significantly due to a budget deficit. Okay, so what can we deduce from that? We can deduce that, yeah, I mean, that one's pretty, yeah, straightforward. You might maybe draw out some implications about why, about what the rationale for cutting the budget is, whether it would be politically popular or not. So budget deficit, yeah, maybe you can justify it. On the other hand, police budget tends to not be that popular to cut those sorts of things. That being said, it also says other concerns within the city. So that might mean that there's pretty good reason, again, to cut the budget. Maybe there's some other health concerns that are overwhelming in the city, education needs. So again, we have to make lots of inferences from this info slide. He would need resources for wiretaps, manpower, and other requirements. So again, he's pretty confident, pretty compelling that there's evidence, but it's nonetheless like, he needs these things to do the mission. He discovers a series of dead bodies in abandoned areas which have likely died in a non-violent nature. Okay, so suggests there's nothing significantly gruesome about the bodies. They're just kind of there. In order to add political pressure and restore public interest in the police, he considers manipulating the bodies and fabricating evidence to make the deaths appear like murders, uses similar techniques to all bodies to feign the appearance that a lone serial killer is responsible for the killings. So this is a big sentence. Again, what can we take from this? We could probably take that, again, the techniques he'd be relatively familiar with, and the techniques would have to be relatively consistent to match the serial killer MO. Anyway, I'm kind of digressing here, but I guess the point, what I would say is, I think a lot of people launch into debates without really taking the step to digest lengthy info slides. Well, not just lengthy info slides, any info slides, but particularly cases where there are little like inferences that you can draw out from the info slide that become really important in the debate. Did anything jump out in the info slide that I've kind of missed in my little quick rattling off here that they feel would be, important to draw out in the debate? Like, was there something else that, has jumped out to people here that I've, missed? Maybe covers the main things, I don't know. But yeah, you can see from that, these are things that you can very easily kind of, maybe this is like, I don't know, maybe not the best example, but things that you can definitely convert into arguments. Like, the likely success of this in the first place, how compelling this would be as a narrative to getting the police budget up and running. Like, again, how does this still weigh against other things? The first slide says that there is other concerns within the city. So all of that, I think, can be drawn out. But I think I'll leave this particular strategy as it is for now. I think it's relatively straightforward, but just, again, something to think about, because I think it's one of those things when the rush of prep, people kind of forget to do these things sometimes. So this is the next strategy I'd like to talk about, which is that sometimes, and again, this can be like in cases where you're struggling for extension material as well, but it could also be just in any other kind of setup debate, anytime you're setting up a debate or whatever, where you can really hone in and extract arguments from the particular motion wording. So again, I'm just going to give you an example based on a debate I happen to have done. So I did a debate. I couldn't find the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of "This House regrets the rise of celebrity social activism." Now, in this debate, I'm pretty sure that OG did like the very classic, like, celebrities are, not the most informed. They don't always, like, make the most educated kind of statements in their activism. And further, it actually can turn people off social progress sometimes, because it's like, oh, who are these out of touch celebrities telling us what to think, blah, 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 blah. I mean, again, those were going to be probably the obvious gov lines, right? So the extension that we ran in this particular debate was all about the rise specifically and what that trend has looked like and why that's bad. Again, noting that the motion is specifically about the rise. Now, of course, the OG's arguments about celebrities not being the most informed and turning people off do apply, right? They apply whether this happens somewhat or whether this happens in a risen fashion. But we tried to do framing about why. I guess we were more direct to the motion. So we talked about, I can't remember exactly the arguments ran, but it was a lot about how the rise of it kind of gives every celebrity kind of their own niche to talk about. And the problem with that is it actually just fractures attention away from the most important causes at a time, and did kind of like some kind of wanky historical analysis about how, for example, if you look at like the 90s and things like Live Aid and like, the causes that like Princess Diana or whatever were involved in, it made a concerted effort because the amount of fundraising that happened associated with those causes was so significant. Like everyone it was kind of like all in on a few causes. That's why like eventually you got enough of a mass and the social mobility, around issues like the AIDS epidemic and stuff like that, because there was like a very much an all-in approach. Whereas when everyone's kind of got their niche, it kind of divides out that focus. Again, I don't know if this is really true. It was a bit of a, we had fun running it, but you can kind of see from that we were like, okay, let's just like shit, the classic arguments have been taken. What can we talk about with respect to the rise? And that was, anyway, it paid off. But that's an example that comes to mind. So using kind of a similar approach, let's look at the next motion, which is in a world where realistic androids exist, this house supports the rise of relationships with realistic androids. Now, I'm going to, again, just kind of look at this from let's say OG has kind of, they've taken the kind of, some people are lonely, relationships don't work out always for these people. Good that they have the option of a relationship with an android. It just like gives more optionality to people who might struggle in relationships. I want you to take a moment to look at the various parts of the wording of this motion to consider what could perhaps be run in addition to what I've said from the government perspective. Just simpler to focus on that at this point. So have a think if there's anything else that you think the motion wording in particular gives us some ideas. Yes, Jeremiah.
I think there's two things that I flag. I think the first is that irrespective of the motion, in the world that we're debating, these androids exist and intuitively to some capacity will be used. And secondarily talks about the rise. So I think I would assume reasonably that in a world without this motion, they are used, but maybe primarily about the people that opening government talk about, the people that are lonely, et cetera, et cetera. I think their use is kind of symmetrical on both sides of the house. So I think the extension that I would have is that the rise of it would mean that it wouldn't just be confined to people who are lonely, but it would be more of a normative thing to be in relationships with such androids. And I think the extension would then be that it helps those people more because they're not really seen as like weirdos or like outcasts for doing it, because it's something that's somewhat normalized in society, at least to a greater extent than it is in opening government's case.
Yep, perfect. Shrishti.
I had a question. So when we talk about the rise of relationships, are we also talking about, say, non-romantic relationships, or do you think we should focus heavily on romantic ones?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I definitely think there could be, you're right. And that's, you know what, that's a kind of assumption that I've flown straight into. I think because I've seen this motion before, and where I remember it was people talking about romantic relationships, but you're totally right that it doesn't specify that. And that is an inference in the wording that you can absolutely draw out to make potential other types of arguments about the loneliness epidemic and just friendships and those sorts of things. So is that kind of the direction you were kind of thinking or heading in?
Yeah. And that was more so for like what Jeremiah said before me, but also looking at the wording for like where realistic androids already exist and stuff like that. A framing that we could come up with is, I don't know if this is like problematic framing, I hope it's not, but like if you think about queer relationships, there existed a world where queer relationships didn't exist, and then, I mean, not that they didn't exist, it's just that, you know, they were not very common, but then came the rise of them, and had we not supported that, right, that would be really harmful to a huge community of people, which goes beyond just romantic relationships. It's also about finding safe spaces and stuff like that. Obviously with androids it's a little wonky, but I feel like that framing can help establish the impacts more intuitively in the minds of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think both of those strategies are great ideas and really capitalizes on the rise of wording in particular. There's one other idea that I want to mention, and it's not my original idea. I just had the pleasure of watching Dylan McCarthy run a, classic Dylan big brain idea when I judged them doing this from CG. And the idea was essentially that, and I, again, like this was something that like I think it was my motion at this comp, and hadn't even thought of this in testing, right? Which is, it's so fun when you watch debaters make arguments that you're like, this didn't even occur to me. But the argument essentially was that Dylan capitalized on the first part of the motion wording, which is that in a world where androids already exist, to explain that we don't know exactly what their kind of sentience is like in this scenario. Chances are that there is some possible sentience that exists, or at least some capacity to feel things, or at least a trajectory where it might head in that direction. And then basically said that in that context, they will already be doing a range of tasks in this world. It's the rise of relationships that humanize those androids and essentially make us want to treat them better. It was granted maybe, first or fourth type case where if you don't kind of prove all the linkages around possible sentience, the, scale of the relationships, why then that leads to change in the way that we treat androids. If any of those links are lost, this is not going to be a successful case. But nonetheless, in this case, it was. And again, that worked simply by looking at the first part of the wording of the motion and kind of going from there. So anyway, I guess this is just my point to say that sometimes you stare at a motion similar to the previous, stare at an info slide or a motion enough, and something from the wording or the burden of the motion will jump out at you. So if you're stuck, this is definitely a strategy that I would recommend. So let's go to the next one. So I know this kind of sounds, again, crazy obvious, but I find that teams often struggle for material or struggle to think of arguments when they can just simply answer the most basic fundamental questions of the debate and they've not thought to do this. So I'll give you an example in the first motion first, which is that developing countries with high rare earth mineral reserves should set up their own state-owned enterprises rather than rely on multinational corporations to extract them. So, you're going to think of some pretty, I would hope, some obvious arguments jump out here around how, this is good for states to be able to reap the benefit of the resources that they have. Corporations bad, Western influence bad, blah, 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 blah. But teams often skimp out on the very kind of basic setup premises that would be necessary in order to kind of have efficacy following any of your arguments. What I mean by that is, have you taken the time to explain why these state-owned enterprises would be successful, right? Like, have you just done that basic setup? Because that is argumentation. That is argumentation that proves the core premise of the motion. If you're doing that on opening, you're plugging away burdens that would otherwise maybe be filled later. Or if you're closing and your opening's not done a good job of this is critical additions that you can provide, which, yes, are arguments in and of themselves. So an example here would be, okay, why would they be successful? Number one, because state-owned enterprise models are generally replicable across different countries. So you can copy on best practices that exist. Number two, you can get expertise from a whole range of different states to come help you establish these things. Number three, you can create models that have a degree of sustainability. There's just a few things you can say to basically just capture the essential premise of this will work. That's it. So taking that same kind of approach with the next example, this house would legalize vigilantism in high crime areas. How could we kind of take this approach with this motion? And sorry, I know that's a bit of a vague direction, but I'm trying not to be too leady here. If people are kind of catching my drift. Has anyone got any thoughts on how we could do this? Mikolash.
Yeah, I think when people think vigilantism, they think like flocks of people armed, trying to pretend they're the police, trying to, act because police or the existing structures are not strong enough. And I think Batman, thanks, Jeremiah, exactly. And I think the characterization would be we would legalize it, therefore we would regulate it, therefore we would prevent angry mobs, I don't know, trying to target specific populations within certain areas. So I think the characterization would be, it's not supporting it per se to saying that it's good. It's saying that if it's going to exist either way, especially in higher crime areas, might as well regulate it. I think regulation here is the key in framing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's definitely a great strategy for this particular motion. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on how we might tackle this? Shrishti, yeah.
So I was thinking that in areas with high crime, we can probably do a bit of characterization of what the police force or just the task force here looks like. It might be underfunded, overworked, and we can run some arguments about either corruption or just connections with the whatever gang is running there. So if you legalize vigilantism, now you just have more people on the ground who can quote unquote fight crime. And so that might be our mechanism for proving efficacy of the move. Yep, great. Jeremiah?
Yeah, I don't know if sure you said this. I didn't hear the last bit of what she said, but I think tying into your example in the first motion, proving vigilantes' capacity to actually combat the kind of crimes that's going on. Because if it's legal and there's some sort of deficit in the police force in terms of handling these crimes, then there'll be a burden on gov to prove that vigilantes who may intuitively be unarmed or have less training would be successful. This might look like, setting up training academies in the area, equipping people with knowledge, not giving them weapons. That would be a very bad idea, but at least making sure they're reasonably armed with what they need to do to at least give some comparative benefit.
Yeah. So I think building on the things all of you've just said, I think definitely crucial to kind of just explain as an argument why this would be done kind of well, basically. So I think in addition to the things you said, just talking about how members of local communities often have really keen knowledge and they kind of know how to navigate these scenarios. They're used to violent crime. This is not something that is something that's kind of out of their, line of sight, something they've not thought about. So, it might not be we want them to go beat up criminals, but maybe they own a local shop and they feel comfortable entrapping someone in that shop and then, waiting for the police to come and those sorts of things, which would, maybe is something that, I don't know, kind of blurs the line of vigilantism, but things that kind of like are local strategies that local people with knowledge about their area and who's a criminal and like all of that would know. And importantly, a characterization of people is that most people are somewhat risk averse. They don't want to risk their life unnecessarily. So they're probably not going to do things that do that because they still want to balance the right to vigilantism with their own safety, but also wanting to make sure they don't harm others in the process. People are mindful of these things. And again, very, very basic premise, but I think is something that I've seen missed a whole lot in debates like this. So just if you're struggling with arguments, if all else, just say, number one question, how will this work well? And that's an argument in and of itself. So yeah, just take the time to think about that. So yeah, great ideas. We'll go to the next one and we'll sort of, I think we're doing okay for time. So again, pretty basic strategy, but I think the thing I would say here is just ask yourself what you do know and work from there. So I've given you an info slide, which is like a proposal for the East African Federation, new sovereign state formed from the existing 7 states of the East African Community: Burundi, Congo, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. A draft constitution is currently being written. This house supports the creation of the East African Federation. So I think a lot of teams would probably look at a motion like this if they're not particularly well versed in knowledge around this continent or, a similar motion in any other context, and think like, oh crap, I don't know things about Burundi. I don't know things about, Kenya. Like I know a few things, but yeah, I don't know the specifics of this, right? And people can very easily panic. What I would say then is take stock of what you do know, right? And again, I'm kind of building off an example that I've seen debated where teams were somewhat unsure about what subject matter knowledge was applicable. But what I really liked was, and then there were questions about, well, like, what's spec, what can the average intelligent voter credit? And what I really liked was how one of the op team members approached this motion and said, look, what can we be pretty sure the average intelligent voter does know? We know, number one, that Africa is a large and very diverse continent, right? The needs of countries in Africa are, like most continents, very large and geographically dispersed, right? Number one fact that we know. Cool, easy. I feel confident as the judge crediting that. What else do we know? We know that the continent has unfortunately experienced instability and also fighting amongst neighbors in recent decades. Looking, you don't need to look to South Sudan, Rwanda, and those sorts of things to see that instability has existed. Okay, sure, I feel pretty confident crediting that as a judge. What else did they say? That has often been exploited by Western powers, those sorts of things. I can't remember how else they did it, but they kind of rattled off some very like intuitive things that, yeah, we know these things, we feel confident about these things. And then just basically linked those things to the motion and said, well, as a result, we think the creation of this federation would probably not, I maybe don't have all the spec about Burundi, but I would posit that the needs of Burundi are probably different to the needs of someone in Uganda, and the developmental trajectory is very, very different. That's one linkage to the facts we've just talked about. We also know, because of that instability, that when you're kind of aggregating those resources and forcing that state to make decisions as a common entity, that people may not feel that their interests are being represented, which can therefore inflict the very tension that we've talked about prior. So again, it was just a very like logical, this has happened previously, this is a fact we know, therefore it's a very reasonable inference to assume that that might have then the corresponding impact here. And again, it didn't require me to know a huge amount about other countries, and again, people would I would posit debaters would often kind of panic. They shouldn't. We should know more about Africa, to be clear, but some debaters would kind of panic. So this is just like we won't workshop an example here, but yeah, something that I would keep in mind. Just take a moment, even if it's spending 2 minutes of your prep time, just asking yourself, what do I already know? And then seeing how you can transpose that to the debate at hand. And the last kind of strategy that I have for people, again, nothing too revolutionary here, but is just going through the stock arguments or kind of a stock structure, and then just letting it fill in itself, right? So if I'm doing almost any ban debate, my structure is going to be broadly the same. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then just characterizing the problem, why this would be effective. So that's, I guess, going back to the previous tip we talked about. What would then be the benefit? And they're different things, right? Because people often conflate those two things. Why something would work is different than to what is the corresponding benefit that flows on as a result. And then fourthly, in any ban debate, you're probably restricting people's freedoms. So you probably want to talk about why it's justified. So thinking with that in mind, let's say you've got a debate which is this house would invade X country, I don't know, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, whatever the case might be. Does anyone have in mind a kind of general template or structure that they might follow when doing a debate like this? And you can take a moment to think about it. It's a little bit similar, I think, to above, but if not, that's okay. Like I would go about it pretty similarly, to be honest. Necessity, yep, perfect. Yep. So I'll just read it out for those watching any recording. Number one has been suggested is necessity. So I think, yes, that's like what is happening in this country. Why would we need to invade? The second would be capacity. Like I think that's again sort of similar to efficacy, which is why this intervention would work. Yep. And then the third comment is severity of harms is more important than personal freedom, short-term benefit. So why is this morally justified? So that might be any kind of examination of like the leaders in question, like not being democratically representative or something else that's like happening in that country that outweighs the infringement of that right. Absolutely. And then perhaps then a longer term analysis of what the benefits are. And perhaps as well, a quick analysis of what are the alternatives and why they're insufficient. Like you'd probably have to run through sanctions, diplomacy, this, that, why none of them are going to work. So again, we've got what is the need? How can we do it in the short term? What would this look like in the long term? Why are there no other available options? And why is this like principally justified? That can probably link to the first point about like characterizing the state being in a bad state or something like that. So again, like you're like, you'll get this motion, shit, like I know nothing about Venezuela. What can I do? Okay, don't panic. Just write this structural overview and then fill it in. And maybe you can only think of one reason for one of the things, but that's fine. Like you've still then got a general shell for your case, and maybe one of your arguments is not as fleshed out as it could be, but you've still, got three other ones that are, and that might be enough at the end of the day. Because especially if you're opening, you've still taken away kind of the key points that any closing team's going to later get to. So yeah, just as a kind of forward-thinking tip, if you're someone that's not as comfortable, like for many of you, you'll be very comfortable with these stock arguments. They'll be in here, you don't need to write them down. But for those of you who are maybe newer to debating, I would kind of even consider taking the most standard motion types. This house would ban, this house would legalize, invading this, can't think of some others, but like, and then just like writing out some shell templates that you can come back to if you need to. And these structures are tried and tested. There's a reason why these are the structures of debaters that have won worlds on similar types of arguments. It's because it's a logical flow to follow. It makes sense. So don't be afraid to come back to this sort of stuff. All right, the last thing I'm going to just leave you with is just some thoughts, noting those are the kind of main key strategies. I again just want to emphasize you often know more than you think you do. So don't panic, stay collected, use your prep time effectively, be deliberate, say, okay, I'm freaking out, I don't know anything, but let's just take 2 minutes to write down the stakeholders and what we know, and let's come back to it, or something like that. Number 2 is draw from other teams, especially if you're in back half. If you don't know anything about the motion, just kind of listen very intently to what's been said so far and try to write down so you don't forget it later. Just write down any key facts that you hear. And if they sound persuasive and legitimate and teams have kind of agreed on them, just run with them and then just try to kind of exploit them later. Thirdly, I think there are a few drills that can, sorry, excuse me. There are a few drills that I think can kind of help with these sorts of things. So I guess, just do a random search for an IR motion on Hello Motions and just, time yourself prepping a PM or something and just write it down and send it to someone else for feedback. Ask people to give you motions to prep on areas that you know that you're not particularly strong on, or watch a debate on YouTube that's like a spec motion where the team in front of you is giving an opening case, and then prep doing a back half and those sorts of things. And again, you can just do this yourself. You can track your progress internally, or you can send your case to someone else for feedback. You can record yourself and send that to someone else for feedback and those sorts of things. Again, focusing on the areas that you know that they're not your strong suits, I think is obviously the most best use of your time. The fourth thing I want to just make is a comment on quote unquote structural reasons. I personally don't like how teams have kind of used this in recent years, which is to be oh, we can't you shouldn't credit, matter and material. And this is a structural reason that's more persuasive. I don't really like this trend, because I think that empirical analysis and knowledge is an important part of debates. It's a way of making debates more grounded in reality and not just this wanky kind of exercise between our spare time. So I would kind of reject the trend of deferring always to structural reasons. That being said, structural reasons or intuition pumps for why a general assertion can be true can be helpful. But I would use this kind of in addition to any subject matter that you have as kind of a way of kind of buttressing or making sure that general empirical claim is more widely known. But just be careful in the way that you're phrasing it, because I think otherwise judges will kind of see that you're sort of trying to discredit empirical analysis, and it may not necessarily fly with every judge you get. So just be mindful of it is all I'm kind of saying. And obviously, you are going to get better at debating the more knowledge you consume. I think there's a lot of discussion out there about, reading and this and that, and how can I matter prep? And absolutely, you should do that if you feel you have the time and energy for it. You'll always be better at debating the more you know. But I would encourage you to consume information in a way that you enjoy and will work for you, because I think if you see matter prep as a chore, you're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to do it long term, and you're going to kind of get tired of it. So again, a very basic tip, but if you're like me and you just can't read books for shit, find a TikTok channel about a thing you want to learn more about and follow it. If it's history, if it's anything else, find a podcast for something you want to learn more about, and do it while you're out on a walk or while you're driving to work or anything like that. That's going to work for you. I just would encourage people to do prep in a way that will be enjoyable for them. that is it from me. So again, nothing too innovative here, but I hope those kind of prompts are useful things to think about going forward. Very happy to answer any questions you have, both regarding this, but also anything else that is on your mind. Or, but people should also feel free to DM me privately. I'm very happy. I may not respond to you straight away, but yeah. Anything anyone has? People feeling good. Yeah, Liv.
So I was just gonna say, like in general, in things like maybe like techie or AI motions, if there's like one person in the debate that seems to have like a lot of spec, and they just say things that like sound true and probably have some level of analysis to them, how do you necessarily pick apart like claims where you don't know if they're true or not, essentially, in a debate? I guess this goes for anything, but like anything that you
Yeah.
specifically don't have a lot of knowledge about.
Yeah, I don't know. I find look, it works sometimes. I kind of find it to be a bit of like a cheap tactic's not the right word, but like, I don't know, it kind of annoys me sometimes when teams are like, oh, well, like the average intelligent voter like couldn't possibly know this. Um, so let's just dismiss it. And then it's like, well, maybe they would know this. I don't know. Like you're gambling a little bit. What I'm trying to think of a way to explain it in this context, but what I would probably say is maybe, like, again, you can do that sometimes. Maybe that strategy works sometimes, and judges will be like, yeah, that sounds too techy. I'm not going to credit it. But what I think is maybe a better tactic sometimes, and again, it really just depends on what example you're talking about, is to try to just point to the plurality and diversity of the context you're talking about and why maybe that's true for some things. I don't know, could possibly true, but it may not be true for every type of example you're talking about. So I don't know if it's like the application of AI in like the health sector. I don't know if that always looks like that in this sector, or maybe if again we're talking about like the application of a political theory in a Western country, that might not always look like that in the developing world or a post-colonial context. So I would kind of, my preferred approach often here is to kind of muddy the waters by saying, I don't know, that could be true when you're talking about, but that's, maybe not the vast majority of context. Again, I'm trying to think of how that kind of works here, but yeah, I mean, I go back to kind of the kind of, that's where I guess you can chuck out sort of some quote unquote structural reasons or two. Um yeah, and again, this maybe is like where I would try to fight things kind of on the territory that you're comfortable with. So again, sort of without, the specific context in mind, but you know, again, I would struggle with being very specific about AI developments and things like that. But what I do feel pretty comfortable talking about is government incentives and how governments regulate things and those sorts of things. And even if it's not their incentives now, what their incentives maybe will look like on a longer term basis and kind of what the expected trajectory is. So I guess forward-looking kind of conceptions of debate is like your friend as well, because then you're not grounded by what is the reality at this point in time, which another team might have a factual, claim about, but what we can reasonably deduce will be the trajectory and trend in the future. So then you're kind of almost out framing them, being like, I don't know, maybe that happens now, but based on what we know and what government incentives are, I doubt it's going to look like that in 10 years from now. Not a perfect answer, but those are the intuitions that would come to my mind, I guess. Yeah, Clara.
Okay, let me know if this question makes sense at the end. But basically, if say like the motion was this house would form like X currency union with like X states. If you have say like you have two teams which clearly are really great with econ and IR, and like you get two teams that are clearly like engaging with each other really heavily on like the specky stuff. Like my question is like how do you, even if you don't know necessarily what they're talking about, like how do you kind of engage with your perceived biggest threat, whilst like maintaining your own sort of arguments that you and another team might have. Because I've had kind of scenarios before where it's like very much like two teams, it seems, fighting against each other, and then two teams very kind of left out of the debate.
Yeah. That's again a tricky one, and really depends how well you feel you might have any capacity to respond to any of the arguments at hand. I guess teams often do the tactic where they try to align themselves with another team in the debate. So like maybe you spot like the other team in the room that also does not know a huge amount of the things, and you can kind of like maybe agree with the metric that they're running to kind of, frame it as a by our conception of the debate. So you're sort of aligning yourself and trying to frame as if your argument is not this like outlier misc kind of conception. It's one that like another team agrees with. That said, this is not free of risk as well, because maybe that other team is not doing so well and you don't want to align with them because they're not like framing this debate in the strongest way. I think secondary to that, it really depends on how confident you feel, obviously, having a crack at responding to any of the arguments that you've heard so far. Assuming you don't feel well equipped to break down the technical detail of what other teams have said, again, I would just be fighting this debate on a different metric. So yeah, I'm shit at finance. I would frankly struggle to make technical arguments about any sort of financial or currency union. I would bring the debate back to politics and like relationships. And I think the way that you could perhaps in this particular case outweigh the kind of technical aspects is by being like, look, we won't get into the technical things, but let's just say that for the technical assumptions of these teams to work, you need to have buy-in into that project politically in the first place. So you make their arguments contingent on yours, essentially, that in order for their arguments to actually stick, you first need to have a political system and agreed understanding that buys into the project, supports the project, would be supportive of the project long term, is willing to kind of stand together with each other through fluctuations of currency, this and that. Like I don't know shit all about currency, but I know that you need a commitment long term to the project. So again, I don't know if that's the best advice, but I would just I can think of the only way is to, if not align yourself with another team, is to just reframe it on your metrics and try to make their case kind of dependent on yours. Like people use the term logically prior, but I kind of hate that. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, those would be my thoughts. Does anyone else have any questions? We're sort of close to time anyway. I guess, yeah, Jeremiah might make this one the last question if that's okay with people. Yep, shoot.
Right. So I was thinking about like empirical evidence and how to rebut it. You said that sometimes structural reasons isn't the strongest way to rebut empirical evidence. So my question is, how would you go about tackling that? Because I think sometimes it's kind of hard when a team pretty like convincingly says that something is empirically true to kind of like work within those parameters in the context of the debate.
Yeah. It is hard, especially if that team kind of presents an argument with a lot of gusto and believability. You obviously can just counter assert and just at the very least try to muddy the waters, but that is obviously a risk. Then the judges like which team is, sounds more believable, which is always a bit of a roll of the dice. I'm just trying to think of an example where you can unpack a fact by like, making a sort of an inference. So if it's like, this is going to be a shit example, but like, they say Joe Biden is popular, you're like, Joe Biden isn't popular. I'm just trying to think of like some, things that you could point to like, unpack why that might be the case. So it could be, I don't know. There's a lot of coverage about his popularity, which suggests he might not be popular. Like that, again, it's a really shit example, but like I'm trying to be like, are there other facts you can point to which unpack the first pack? fact, if that makes sense. That's one thing I can think of. I guess the other thing is again, it kind of goes back to my comment about diversity of situations. Unemployment is high, could be a fact claim. Maybe it's high in these parts of the world. I'm not sure it's high in the developing, world where wages are lower and therefore it's easier to, so I would if there's scope to kind of move the debate into a context that is more favorable to you, you don't even need to sometimes contest the fact is incorrect. You can just reframe it as not being correct in other contexts and contexts that are more important. It is hard, but I think if you can provide intuitions as to why their factual characterization is not true, that's always a good starting point. But I've just kind of gone blank on some kind of better examples that might demonstrate that, but hopefully you kind of get the gist that I'm going towards here. So Path, if that's okay, I might leave it there, but thank you very much for your time.